Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome to Hands-On Apologetics. You have just entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. Yes, it's always great to be with you. In fact, life is getting better here at the dojo. As I mentioned at the beginning of the week, we have new bookshelves installed in the dojo, and it's been kind of crazy. I still am ordering my books. It's still crazy because I got Calvin next to Jehovah's Witness. I got Luther next to Fold Machine. It's not a good thing, but we are making progress. So life is getting better for the sensei here, and thank you so much for joining us. Got a great program. We're going to have Kenneth Hensley join us. You know, Ken wrote an excellent book. It's called The Godless Delusion. He co-wrote it with apologist Pat Madrid. And in this book, what they do is they investigate atheism by kind of looking at it from their own angle. You know, what does it mean if you lead a perfectly consistent non-belief in God? You know, there are important ramifications. And so Ken's been coming into the dojo on a regular basis, and we've been exploring all the different things about how non-belief, if you carry it to its logical extreme, you know, starts important things of reality begin to disappear, like morality and so on. And today he's going to come on, and we're going to talk about knowledge. That you know, what happens to knowledge in a universe if God doesn't exist? So that's kind of fun, you know, just exploring the ramifications of that very important, very fundamental belief in God. And he's going to be coming on the other side of the break. And as always, we have our critical thinking skills with our Finding the Fallacy. Every episode, we go through an informal fallacy, and just to help us, you know, think sharply, think critically. And today's fallacy is the appeal to flattery. So you intelligent folks out there will appreciate that. And also, we're going to meet one of the early church fathers. And today's early church father, actually a very influential church father that practically no one knows about. And I think I'd probably put him in the category of, you know, name an early father who is incredibly influential, yet no one knows about him. It'd be today's early church father, who is St. Caesar of Arles. St. Caesar of Arles. Told you wouldn't know him, but we're going to learn about him in a couple of minutes. But before I do that, I want to thank everybody watching live stream at our social media section of the dojo. That's off to this side if you're watching me, and that's on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Great to see you. Yeah, thank you for the emojis. Appreciate it, Jose. And also want to thank all of you listening on Catholic radio around the nation and outside the borders across the sea. Welcome aboard. And like I said, we're going to have a lot of fun today. It's always fun to have Ken on. Ken's just a wealth of information, and it's just a really interesting area to explore. So without further ado, why don't we talk about defining the fallacy for today, which is the appeal to flattery. And the appeal to flattery is a fallacy in which a person uses flattery or excessive compliments in an attempt to appeal to the audience's vanity to win support for their side. This is also known, you know, there's a lot of AKAs when it comes to informal fallacies. They have many different names. It's also known as the apple polishing fallacy, the wheel greasing fallacy, the appeal to pride, appeal to vanity. And all these fallacies are is ways of trying to influence people to agree with your position without actually presenting evidence or arguments for the position. So flattery happens by basically flattering your audience, or by couching your side of the argument in terms that would appeal to the vanity of the audience, so that they'll more likely support your position. For example, this occurs a lot in debates where someone will say, well, knowledgeable people know that X is true. Or, amongst the most learned of the scholars out there, they find this as an obvious fact, or something like that. And that's kind of an appeal to flattery, somewhat indirect, but nevertheless it still commits this fallacy. Why? Because it's basically telling the audience, you are really smart, and so you probably should also sign on with this particular position. Of course, you can do a direct thing. You could talk about people, how knowledgeable they are and smart they are, and things like that, and try to curry favor with the audience. But personally, I think the more indirect one, I think, is more insidious, because it doesn't really, you can tell when somebody's trying to flatter you, and it doesn't take a lot of critical thinking skills to recognize that. But when you start painting your arguments in a way that you're a very intelligent crowd, and my position is actually, most intelligentsia would sign in on this. That's when you're committing the appeal to flattery, the informal fallacy for today. So beware of that. Evidence should be able to stand on its own. You don't need to, say that the most learned agree with it, or the experts or something like that. As if you don't agree with it, you're not learned or you're not an expert. So just beware. I always say, your antennas should go up, and be aware. The radar screen should flip on at that point, because warning, you are being manipulated by a fallacy. So that's our finding of the fallacy for today, the appeal to flattery. Let's move on to the Meet the Early Church Father for today, who is St. Caesar of Arles, who was born sometime AD 470, died AD 542. So he's relatively late early church father. Caesar of Arles was a Burgundian, and he undoubtedly was one of the most influential Gaelic bishops of his time, and in other words, French bishops. A monk from the monastery of Lorenz, and he held important archiepiscopal see of Arles from 205 until his death 40 years later. Caesar is probably most known as the greatest moral teacher in the Western Church between St. Augustine and Berthold of Regensburg, and he was likewise renowned for his pastoral abilities. Not only did he personally escape the taint of semi-Pelagianism, which was a heresy which more or less denies God's grace, that we can earn salvation, which infected many of his countrymen and fellow monks, but he also wrote vigorously against that heresy. In fact, he presided over one of my favorite councils of the church, which is the Council of Second Orange, which met in 529 AD. And Second Orange condemns semi-Pelagianism and upholding a modified form of Augustinianism. And the proceedings of Orange very shortly received specific papal approval. So it is counted as an authentic council of the church. And by the way, if you're talking to Protestants, you should know about Second Orange. Check it out. Its decrees are all in the form of canons, and it's worth reading, folks. Trust me, you will get an incredible appreciation of the role of grace in your life by reading the canons of Second Orange. So if you're defending a faith, you need to know that. Another thing you should know about Caesar, this isn't in Jurgens, but it's something that Marcus Grodi kind of gave me a little vignette about that I thought was really cool, is that Arles is situated between Rome and much of Europe. So any bishops or ecclesiastical authorities that were going to visit Rome generally passed through St. Caesar's See. And this is why he's so influential, because he realized that preaching in his day was not very good. I know that's a shock, when was a bishop or a priest is not a very good preacher? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But anyway, he realized that theological sermons were really lacking. So what he did was he wrote down his own sermons, and as people passed through his see, he would give them copies of his sermons. And so in a way, all his sermons were being broadcasted, throughout Europe. And so his sermons were very heavy in terms of good, solid moral theology. And that's how he became, like I said, one of the most influential yet little-known persons in church history. Because, as he's handing off these sermons that he made, it was being used and preached and actually handed down, for centuries in these churches as like pre-canned sermons, and very good ones at that. He's especially renowned for his works of charity. Caesar himself lived in perfect poverty while distributing to the poor and using for the ransom of captives all the wealth that came to him. So he was a poor bishop at that. A Valuable Life of St. Caesar is in 2 volumes, and it's written by 5 of his friends and intimate acquaintances between the years 542 and 549. So here we have somebody who, this is beautiful because it's exactly how God works in the world. These people who maybe aren't the greatest renown, everybody doesn't know St. Caesar of Arles, but nevertheless he's incredibly effective. And most of all, he was incredibly holy. And those two almost always go together. Holiness and effectiveness, they do God's work, but not always, you don't always enter the Hall of Fame by doing it. Nevertheless, you do help the body of Christ. So coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to talk with Master Apologist Ken Hensley about knowledge and disbelief.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These two gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2727. 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And we are going to talk about the ramifications of the most important and most fundamental question anybody could ask about how things are, and that is whether or not God exists. And if you answer God does not exist, that is not a neutral position, but actually it has ramifications in terms of, you would be surprised how many different avenues. And joining us is Ken Hensley. Ken Hensley, we've been exploring this issue through a number of Hands-On Apologetics broadcasts, all different areas, from everything from morality to knowledge to how do we know that other people exist? So Ken Hensley is a nationally known Catholic teacher and author who, since converting to the Catholic Church in 1997, has worked extensively in the field of apologetics. He has been interviewed on numerous times on Catholic radio and television, such as Hands-On Apologetics, and he works as the online resource and pastoral care coordinator for the Coming Home Network. His website is kennethhensley.com. And Ken, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Hello, Gary. Good to be with you again.
It's great to be with you. And, you just came from Rome. So you got to tell us a little bit about the trip. How did it go?
Well, okay, I got to be quick. You told me 60 seconds and you're going to slam me off the phone. No, it was our first Coming Home Network Deep in History pilgrimage that we took to Assisi, Siena, Orvieto, and Rome to study the history of the Catholic Church in Rome. And it was just a great trip. We had a bus full. There were about 45, 6, 7 of us, something like that. And we traveled through there and we just saw a lot of wonderful things. And we learned about Peter, learned about Paul. So basically, the theme of our pilgrimage is going to be deep in history. And let me say quickly that our plan for next fall is to do our pilgrimage to Germany and to study the history of the Catholic Church in Germany. So that's going to include the founding of the church there early on in the early centuries, Athanasius being exiled to the city of Trier in the 4th century, St. Boniface coming in the 8th century, who's referred to as the Apostle of Germany. And then a lot of teaching about Martin Luther and the Reformation and all that happened in the 16th century. So we'll be visiting the Catholic cities, the Catholic sites, and then traveling up through the sites that are associated with Martin Luther's life. Eisleben, where he was born, Eisenach, Wittenberg, and whatnot. And I'll be lecturing extensively on the Reformation. So that's what we're planning for next fall.
Wow, that's exciting. Wow, nice job. Especially it'd be great to have you on site, actually, because you've done a lot of work as far as historical work with Luther and so on. Sounds like a great pilgrimage.
Well, I think it will be. I did a similar trip with Steve Ray about 2 years ago for the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. He did a trip to Germany that was focused entirely on the Reformation, and he invited me along to teach then. And the trip was so great that I wanted to create something that is similar, although ours is going to be different. I'm very excited about doing it. I think these are great opportunities for converts, especially, to just see these sites and come alive in their faith in a new way. So I feel very fortunate to have that as a part of my work.
Very good. Wow. So, so now you're back in the saddle, back here in America.
Yeah.
And back with this idea of kind of pulling out the logical consequences, the ramifications of denying something as fundamental as God's existence.
Yeah, when you said a few moments ago that it was a good idea to be on site teaching about the subjects, I thought immediately that it would be impossible for me to be on site teaching about this because I'd have to go to an atheist universe which doesn't exist.
That's true.
I'd have to go to a universe in which God doesn't exist, so we are on site here, but it's all theoretical. It's in the mind.
You also wouldn't be able to communicate it either because of all the things that we talked about in previous programs.
Yeah, I guess so. You're right. And that's going to come out today. In fact, today I came to you today thinking, man, we're not going to get through the material, but this is probably fine because actually in my article series, I wrote a couple of articles, 3 articles really that focus in on the issue that we're on today. And so I think we should just move through the material talking and get as far as we can. And more important that the ideas be clear than that we get through all of them. You agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well, I want to launch out by reading a quotation again that I've read a couple of times because it really sets the context. And this is a quotation from a book called Freedom and Neurobiology by an atheist professor and philosopher, John Searle. This is what he says. There is exactly one overriding question in contemporary philosophy. It's important that we hear this. He says there is one overriding question in contemporary philosophy. Here it is. How do we fit in? How do we fit in? And then he explains, how can we square this self-conception of ourselves as mindful, meaning-creating, free, rational, etc., agents with a universe that consists entirely of mindless, meaningless, unfree, non-rational, brute physical particles? Now that's quite a mouthful, but the question that he's asking there, Gary, is the question that I ask and that I'm asking in my entire approach apologetically and evangelistically to those who doubt or deny the existence of God. And that is, I want to pose the question, how do we fit in to your atheist conception of the universe? And you mentioned in your introduction that the atheist is not taking a neutral position. And this is another way of saying that. I refer to my apologetic method as as Wizard of Oz apologetics, because in the Wizard of Oz, there's the sound and fury coming out, but when they get there and they pull the curtain back, guess what you have? You have this little old guy sitting back there with a microphone. Well, yeah. This is an analogy, a loose analogy, but when I deal with the new atheists, with people who have read books by Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and whatnot, and have become atheists, they almost universally have this attitude that comes through. It's kind of a smugness and a self-satisfied attitude, and the attitude is one like this: it's you are the one saying that God exists, and therefore the burden of proof resides completely with you. In fact, I can lean back against the wall. I can relax myself because I'm not asserting anything. I'm simply saying that I lack a belief in God, but I'm not asserting anything positively. You're the one that's making the assertion that God exists. Therefore, you have the burden of proof. Bring me your arguments. And so they can sit back and we make an argument and they can say, that's okay, but it's not really that good, and kind of whack it out of the way. Give me another one. Nah, I don't really buy that one. Give me another. And there's this feeling that they have nothing they have nothing that they're asserting, and therefore they have nothing to defend. And what I want to say first off is that this is not true. There may be some who have nothing to defend because they don't know what they think. But in most cases now, those who espouse the new atheism here in America and throughout the world are materialists. They have a worldview. And that is, they believe that nothing exists in this universe but, well, to use John Searle's words, mindless, meaningless, unfree, non-rational, brute physical particles. So they're asserting a view of the universe, and therefore I think that it's entirely fine to at least challenge their view of the universe or to ask them to explain some things. And the things that I want to ask them to explain is just the question that the atheist philosopher John Searle is asking himself. This is not necessarily a Catholic question or a Christian question. This is a question this atheist philosopher is asking, and that is, okay, how do we fit in? I want to say to my atheist friend, my agnostic friend, okay, if you're a materialist, then explain to me how you fit in. Explain to me how you account for many things in your life that you take for granted and that you believe and that you live in accordance with. And that's what you and I have been doing, Gary. Month after month, we've been looking at a number of issues: human worth and dignity, human rights, morality, meaning and purpose, consciousness, free will, And we've seen, I can't go back and debate the whole thing right now or explain it, but what we've seen is that the atheist materialist cannot square the conception that he or she has in these areas with materialism. The only way that they can make these ideas, the only way that they can make themselves fit into the materialist world is to basically say that all of these are an illusion, that objective morality is an illusion, that the idea that we have any kind of a special value or worth as human beings is illusion, that inalienable rights exist is an illusion, and in fact that consciousness is an illusion. As atheist Daniel Dennett says in his books, consciousness, the sense that I have, that I am me, that I exist as a person, is really just a trick that my brain is playing on me. Because nothing really exists but electrochemical processes taking place in this pile of meat up here in this skull. Electrons firing, neurons firing and whatnot. And so it's an illusion. It's a trick that my brain is playing on me to make me think that there is an I, that I exist. So even human consciousness becomes an illusion. We saw last time that free will is an illusion, because the universe is mechanical. And if I'm part of this mechanical universe, everything that takes place in accordance with strict laws of chemistry and physics and whatnot. And therefore, the idea that you are an agent free to do anything is another illusion. And Sam Harris, probably the most popular atheist writing today, asserts that as strongly as it can be asserted. He says every single thing you do is the result of prior states of the universe and their laws, and that you and I are nothing more than marionettes dancing on our strings. So when you say that God exists, you're saying this because you're a marionette dancing on a particular set of strings, and you have to say this because of prior states of the universe, your genetic makeup and whatnot. And when I say God exists, it's the same. But then that means that when Sam Harris says that God does not exist, he also is nothing more than a marionette dancing on his strings and saying what he has to say, given prior states of the universe, the laws of nature and whatnot. And that led us in our last meeting to ask the question, why does he bother to write a book?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
why
because
does he bother?
He had no choice, and he's not going to persuade anybody.
Yeah. So anyway, my assertion, and the reason that I make this assertion in evangelism too is this. I believe that if I can show a materialist that I'm talking to in a friendly way, if I can lead a materialist to see that he cannot account for himself, he cannot account for his mind, for his thoughts, for freedom of will, for morality, for any of the things in his life that he cherishes and lives in accordance with, then makes you question his worldview. And I can't believe it comes.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Wow. Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
This is Terry Barber. I want to invite you to take advantage of having your funeral or your loved one's funeral at the Sacred Heart Chapel in downtown Covina. It's a 115-year-old church beautiful chapel. And all you got to do is call me at 661-972-7872, and I'll personally make the arrangements with your mortuary to have your funeral or your loved one's funeral here at Sacred Heart Chapel. You won't regret it. 661-972-7872. God love you.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Ken Hensley about, the ramifications of non-belief. And, Ken, you did a great job summarizing all the different areas that we've covered as far as consciousness and, truth and morality, human dignity.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about knowledge. How does non-belief affect how we know?
Okay. Yeah, that's the one we're going to move into. If I could say one more thing before we do, though, because I was starting to say something at the end that I did want to get through about this evangelistic approach. You see, because I believe, as you do, that each person is created in the image and likeness of God, and every atheist I talk to is someone who is a mirror of God's being, a created mirror of God's being. Because of that, my atheist friend knows at some level that that objective morality exists. He knows that he is a free agent. He knows these things, in other words. And so the point is, he knows all these things. He lives in accordance with them. He knows that he's someone, back to consciousness. The problem is that he can't account for these on the basis of his materialism. And my hope is that to be able to show someone that will lead them to question their worldview as they begin to realize that, wow, in order for me to be a consistent materialist, I'm going to have to call morality an illusion. I'm going to have to call my consciousness itself an illusion, freedom an illusion, the idea that human rights exist, a pure illusion. So yes, let's get on to knowledge. Okay, yeah. The question that I'm wanting to ask here, and the one that we're going to go into probably for a couple of months, is this. What is materialism? What does a consistent materialist or naturalist or physicalist view of the universe do to the possibility of knowledge? And what I want to argue here is that if materialism were true, this is where we're going really down to the bottom line. If materialism were true, we could know nothing at all, including the fact that materialism was true. We could know nothing. And so I believe that materialism as a worldview refutes itself in this way. And if you're asking how so, okay, explain. Let's move through a few steps. Step number one, these are logical steps. Number one, if our universe consists entirely of physical particles, material substances, well, then you and I, as a part of the universe, clearly consist entirely of material substances. That's the first point. And that should follow pretty simply. And atheists admit this all the time. I have a nice little quotation here from Paul Churchland, an atheist philosopher. The important point about the standard evolutionary story is that the human species and all of its features are the wholly physical outcome of a purely physical process. If this is the correct account of our origin, then there seems neither need nor room to fit any non-physical substances or properties into our theoretical accounts of ourselves. We are creatures of matter. Okay, Gary?
Okay. Yeah, that seems almost like the very definition of materialism, right? I mean, the first premise.
The first premise is simply to state it, okay? Yeah. If everything is material, if nothing exists but particles, same for you, same for me. And to make the point that atheists admit this. Atheists state this all the time. Paul Churchland says, Here, there is neither need, there's no need, nor is there any room to fit any non-physical substances or properties into our accounts of ourselves. We are creatures of matter, M-A-T-T-E-R, bottom to top. Okay, that leads to point two. Point two is this. But if all of our features are the wholly physical outcome of purely physical processes, where there is neither need nor room for any non-physical substances or properties, okay, if what Paul Churchman is saying is true, then our thoughts, our ideas, and even the process of reasoning must be material realities as well.
Yep.
Now, this becomes a little more subtle, and it's kind of hard to grasp, but even the thought that I am formulating in my mind right now, even the reasoning process that I'm following, it must all be a material process, an entirely material process. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, in our normal lives, none of us think this way. Yeah. Because again, we're made in the image of God. It's not true, and we know it. I mean, intuitively we know it. In fact, if you just think about the way we talk to people all of our lives, we don't see things this way. We don't see these things at all this way. You know, when I had kids around, my son Kenny and my daughter Blythe, and I said, Kenny, slow down, use your brain. You know, stop and think. You know, there's an assumption there that he, the you, is somehow distinct from his brain, and that he can actually use his brain. You know, when we say to someone, you know, come on, use your brain, stop and think. You know, there's some kind of a separation being made that we all assume in the way that we talk, in the way that we think. While we know that our brains are material, and you know, so you could kill me and take my brain out, and you could lay it on a desk. And we know that our minds are intimately connected to our brains. I mean, we know that there's an intimate connection. If you put a bullet through my brain, it's going to change my thoughts. It's going to affect my thoughts. Or if you cut part of my brain out and throw it away, it's going to affect my thinking. We know that there's a connection between mind and brain, and we know that there's an intimate connection between it. But still, our minds do not seem to be material things, and they have never seemed to be material things. Our thoughts do not seem to be material things, and we conceive quite naturally of thought, thinking, reasoning as being somehow immaterial.
Yeah. You know, so to boil it down, I'm trying to get the idea of a thought being purely material. So if you're doing a simple math problem, it would be like neurological mechanism 1, when it meets another neurological mechanism 2, or another 1, it stimulates a third mechanism that produces a 2. So 1 + 1 = 2, and it's all physical. So I guess if you make a math mistake, then there's something wrong that in that network of neurons that didn't stimulate the right physical properties for the correct answer. I mean, is that kind of
okay?
I know it's a caricature, but
no, I think that what you're saying is entirely true. But if I could let me put it off for a moment, because you're actually leaping like to point 4. You're leaping to a conclusion. You know, see, you're too bright, you're too smart, and you're just like leaping ahead to the final word. But I kind of want to
I'm just trying to picture what a physical thought would be like, you know?
Well, I mean, think of the things that our brains do. Just think of what they do. We're able to reason inductively. That is, we're able to look at a bunch of details and draw general ideas from them. We're able to reason deductively from a general concept to a particular application. We can develop unbelievably complex lines of thought. You look at the equations, you're talking about math, look at the equations that someone like Einstein and others put up on chalkboards, you know, that cover an entire chalkboard. I mean, you know, unbelievably complex lines of reasoning that you certainly couldn't find in the material world anywhere. I mean, you couldn't go out and dig around and find equations in the material world. These things are, well, let's just put it this way at this point. The mind does incredibly interesting things that none of which seem to be material. A memory, an intention, A plan is a material thing. A belief is a material thing. These do not seem to be material. But if nothing exists but material things, then these have to be reducible to matter. They have to be reducible to matter. And because of this, here are a couple of really funny little, I find them funny ideas that atheists have put out, attempting to be consistent with this. One atheist said that our brains produce thoughts and ideas in much the same way as a stomach or the bowels produce digestion. So this is back to this is the image that you were wrestling with a moment ago,
Yeah.
When you said, is it a chemical process that is somehow producing one, and then another chemical process produces the idea of two, and then a third chemical process or physical process? Well, this guy says that the brain is producing thoughts like the stomach produces digestion. Now, of course, the stomach producing digestion is something that we can even see it. It's easy to see it. You have chemical reactions producing a chemical response. But to say that the chemical reactions in the brain produce the theory of evolution or produce the theory of the general theory of relativity or something, it sounds like an entirely different thing. But Darwin was on board with this too. Charles Darwin described thoughts one time as excretions of brain. Excretions.
Wow.
But of course, as soon as you hear that, you feel like you're crossing from one world into another, because we all know what an excretion is. But does a thought seem to you like an excretion of a brain?
No, it doesn't sound attractive at all. And so apparently on this program we have a lot of these excretions. Hopefully they're all good.
Well, let me at least throw out point 3 real quick before the music starts flying at us. Okay, and it's quite simple. Okay, if materialism is true, if our thoughts and our ideas are reducible to physical processes taking place within our brains, then our thoughts and our ideas must be determined by those processes. So point 1 was simply, if nothing exists but material entities, then we must be nothing more than material entities. Point 2 was to say, well, if we are nothing more than material entities, then our thoughts and our ideas must also be material, or produced by material forces. Point 3 is simply to say, well, then they must be determined by those processes, which kind of gets us back to what we talked about last month with freedom. Yeah. If the universe is a material, mechanical machine, if you will, in which everything that occurs in accordance with strict laws of physics, chemistry, and whatnot, then our thoughts must be determined by those processes too. So not only is your brain excreting your thoughts, but deterministically.
Yeah, you can't help but do it. Yeah, that's absolutely. We're chatting with Ken Hensley about thoughts and the non-believers' universe. Stay tuned.
This is Jesse Romero.
And I'm Terry Barber
From the Terry and Jesse Show. And we invite you to listen to the Holy Hour of Power, High Energy Catholic Radio. We're two Catholics with a PhD in common sense. We're on Monday through Friday on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
What we're going to give you is masculine Catholic teachings on the faith. We say we're too inspired to be tired, we're too protected to be dejected, and we're too renewed to be subdued. Why? Because we believe in Jesus Christ and His bride, the church, and we will take each issue of the day and show you how the Catholic Church has the answer for our culture. What we really do is bring men back into the Catholic Church, which it's about time to do. We want men to be leaders in their Catholic faith so that they can bring their family to heaven.
Our program is not right versus left, it's right versus wrong, and our program is where Catholicism and culture intersect. It's High Energy Catholic Radio.
We're going to inspire you to fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ and His bride, the church.
The Terry and Jesse Show on the Virgin Most Powerful app.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Ken Hensley about, if you hold on to a purely material understanding of everything, ultimately that has significant ramifications as far as what you know and what thoughts are. And Ken has been going, step by step, taking through the line of this that really, for the break thing that's our excretions that are followed. In other words, you can't help but have beliefs and thoughts because they're just kind of like the natural byproduct of our minds or our brains.
And think about this stuff, and the reason it's hard is because it's not true. Because if you assume a Christian worldview, if you assume a basic Christian theistic worldview, then all of these things make sense. Since the ultimate reality is a thinking being, God, a living spirit, an infinite spirit, and a moral being and a personal being, then it just kind of follows very naturally that God could create beings who are like him, that reflect his nature and being, and therefore that we could be thinking beings and free, rational beings and moral beings and all of that, and personal beings. So these things follow naturally, and since this is what is true, these are things that we just take for granted from our birth all the way up. And so it's hard to even think in another way, because to think in another way, we have to try to step into a materialist universe that doesn't really exist, and then try to work out what the logical implications would be if it did exist, or if it was true. And some atheists, do this fairly well. There's one, George Wald, a chemistry professor at Harvard in the past, had said one time, 400 years ago, there was a collection of molecules named Shakespeare, which produced Hamlet. Okay, there was a collection of molecules named Shakespeare, and then I love it, which, not who, but which produced Hamlet. Mm-hmm. This is someone who's at least attempting to grapple with this idea that we are material beings from top to bottom, and since we live in a totally material universe, point one, we are nothing but matter. Point two, if we are nothing but matter, then that includes everything we are, including our thoughts, our ideas, even the process of reasoning. And then point three, well, then all this must be deterministic, because in the material universe, everything happens according to strict laws. And now this leads to point four, which is the most difficult to think through. And this is one that we're going to talk about now for a moment. And then we're going to talk about probably the entire time, a month from now. But I don't want to go off into those issues. But point four is this. If all this is the case, and if everything that you, Gary, think, everything that I think is produced and determined by physical processes taking place in our brains, why should we trust our thoughts as being true?
Right. Yeah.
Why should we trust anything that we think to be true, or anything we have in our heads to be properly describable as knowledge? And this is, this is like climbing out on a long branch. It's hard to stay there. It's hard to even grapple with it. It's hard to understand it. But I do think that it follows. I think that it follows. We certainly don't use the word true to describe the excretions of our liver.
Yeah, right.
And we usually don't think of the results of a mechanically deterministic process as being knowledge. The words true, truth, knowledge don't seem to fit within a purely material, mechanical, deterministic kind of process. And if thinking is an entirely physical activity in which our very thoughts are determined by electrochemical processes, impressions, firing of neurons and whatnot, central nervous system activity. If everything I think is determined by this kind of stuff, why should we think the conclusions of this process are true? And this, again, is something that atheists say, to the chagrin, I would think, of other atheists who haven't thought of it yet. But this is what atheists say. J.B.S. Haldane famously asserted, if materialism is true, and he was an atheist scientist, if materialism is true, it seems to me that we cannot know that it is true. If my opinions are the result of the chemical processes going on in my brain, they are determined by the laws of chemistry, not those of logic. Right. Which comes back to the idea that you brilliantly leapt to a little while back, Gary. He's saying that if it's true that my opinions are determined, or they're the result of chemical processes, then he says, wow, they're determined then by laws of chemistry, not by laws of logic. Yeah. And that's where we bring in this whole idea of the laws of logic and the reasoning process. And contemporary Christian philosopher J.P. Moreland used an analogy of the computer to make this same point. And he says basically, would you trust the printout of your computer? Would you trust what it printed out for you as being true if you knew in advance that it had been programmed not by a rational mind, but programmed by a combination of random forces like hail, flying down on the keyboard, like, sitting out in a hailstorm, or by mindless physical, chemical laws? If you knew that your computer had been programmed by mindless physical laws rather than by a mind, would you trust what it printed out for you as being true? Yeah. And the way that Moreland says it is like this. He goes, if mind emerged from matter without the direction of a superior intelligence, why should we trust the deliverances of the mind as being rational and true?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Doesn't it flatten all ideas? Like Shakespeare's idea of Hamlet's on the same par as 1 + 1 = 2, or any other idea. They're all just this biological byproduct that we're predetermined to spit out. So why would you think any of those different products have any correspondence with how things truly are?
Yeah, and especially when you think about the fact that according to the neo-Darwinian view of the universe, evolution is guided by what will produce creatures that have more offspring. It's not driven by truth.
Yeah, right.
I mean, now I am leaping into some of what we're going to talk about next month, but I'll just tantalize in a way. I mean, cockroaches don't think anything about truth, and yet they survive quite well and they multiply quite well. So, evolution is about the ability to multiply and the ability to survive, not about truth. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we're back in the same place, and that is whether looked at from an evolutionary, a neo-Darwinian kind of perspective, or just looking at it as we are today in terms of chemical processes and chemical laws. But here's where this is why the point you jump to really is the point that I think is the deepest point, and that is that when we think, our thinking is guided not by physical laws, but by laws of logic. Our thinking is governed by laws of rationality. When you say 2 + 2 = 4, the process that's going on, it's not a physical process. It's a rational process. Okay? And so if every thought I have is the result of a material process and is actually determined by a physical chemical process, and then how do I know it's true? And you used 1 and 1 plus 1 equals 2. I was going to say 4. 1 plus 1 equals 4. But think of another very, very common logical syllogism, that is taught in every introductory logic course. Premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates was a man. If these premises are true, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates was a man. Then we are driven to a conclusion, C, Socrates is mortal. Right? Mm-hmm. If premise 1 is true, all men are mortal, and if premise 2 is true, Socrates was a man, then it follows inescapably that Socrates was mortal. But notice that it's a law of it's laws of thought, laws of rationality that move you from A and B to C, not physical laws. And so, just as you said it a few minutes ago, I'm trying to imagine if this syllogism is created physically, then that would mean that premise A, all men are mortal, is somehow a physical state that is created by electrochemical processes in my brain. And then premise 2, Socrates was a man, would be another physical state created deterministically by chemical processes happening in my brain. And then I feel like I need to ask the question then, why does the brain feel that it's necessary to create a third physical state? Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be true, and some other proposition wouldn't be true. So yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant point. Boy, I can't believe we're already out of time.
Are we out?
Yeah, we are. We've flown through this hour. Where can people get a hold of your stuff?
Okay. Well, I write for the Coming Home Network. This is where I work full time. And so blog articles and posts and whatnot, they're scattered all over the website at the Coming Home Network. If people want some recorded talks that I've done, they need to go to KennethHensley.com and to the store page where I have MP3 downloads of just a bunch of stuff I've done, mainly though on Protestant Catholic apologetics, the Reformation and whatnot. Although there are a few talks on this subject. I don't have a full recorded series on this subject.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
We'll see you next month, I hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. God wills. We'll be there. Okay. All right. Ken Hensley, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Go to Kenneth Hensley. It's all one word.com. And you can get a lot of great material. As you can tell, Ken has dedicated a lot of time and effort to kind of flush out this whole line of apologetics, and also, check out The God Delusion, which he co-wrote with Pat Madrid, and just great stuff. And the fun continues next week, by the way. We're going to have Mesa Haddad come on the show. That's going to be our first appearance. We're going to talk about evangelism in the streets. Also Carl Keating. Father Ed Freedy is going to join. One of the most remarkable conversion stories I ever heard. It's going to be on Wednesday. And also Steve Oth, another street-level evangelist, is going to join us. And the fun just continues here on Hands On Apologetics. Thank you so much for listening. And coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. It's been a pleasure being with you. And God willing, we'll talk again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.